hire for then, the future sales engineers. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Matt here momentarily, and we'll go ahead and get started. Hey, Matt.
Hey, James. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Awesome. Let me go ahead and start the video.
Perfect.
Beautiful. Okay, great. So, hey, everybody. I'm Marque from Slack, and with me today are Vanessa Martin and Lawryk, also from Slack. Hello. We are very, I would say, unreasonably excited to be here today. We were some of the earliest SEs to join Slack, and collectively, we have around 30 hours of pre-sales experience between us, ranging from companies all the way from EMC, Box, Citrix, Salesforce, Dell. And it's not often that we get a chance to leverage that experience and talk about something that we are seeing, which is kind of the likely future or the unfolding of emerging trends. And I know that predicting futures is always a shot in the dark, but it's an important discussion to have, particularly given the sheer velocity of change that we are now seeing within a short time in our little world. But to do it justice, we are going to have to take a quick step back and talk about how we got here. So I'm going to go ahead and imagine that for the folks on the phone, go ahead and move it. There we go. That there are quite a few of us here today who remember the days of checking your email on the corporate-owned BlackBerry. Perhaps you were doing this while you were checking the MapQuest directions that you'd printed out, sitting somewhere in some anonymous suburban office parking lot. And next slide. Sorry, a little bit of a lag here. And as you were checking those map directions, you were actually heading out to an on-site meeting, because back in those days, most of your meetings were on-site. This was the world that I encountered when I first started my SE career at EMC. You could argue that these were simpler times, and I don't want to say they were easier times or that selling was easier then, because selling is never easy. But ancient technology aside, it was at least a slightly less complicated world. And a big part of this was the fact that there was a predictable sales cycle, largely driven by the sales team. And in many cases, we held most of the cards and most of the information. Flash forward to today, though, and the world looks a little bit different. There we go. On the positive side, your phone is probably one that you own yourself, and you're not limited to email or phone calls in terms of communicating with your customers, so that's awesome. Your phone also has GPS, so you probably don't need MapQuest unless you really like it. Instead of going on site now, we're, thanks to COVID and just the general ongoing rise of telecommunicating, we're more than likely going to be giving demos or presentations from our house. And the good news is there's been an explosion of tools out there like the Zoom that we're all using right now that make this somewhat easier. I'm not saying that our current world is better or worse. All I'm saying is that the current world of the SE is different, and it's changing even more rapidly, especially post-pandemic. So all this raises a question. How do we, as SEs, stay ahead of these changes? And is there an opportunity here to maybe redefine the role of the SE? And how will we know what that SE looks like when we see them? So one of the first ways to maybe think about this is probably the most obvious one, is just to look at what's going on today. What are the emerging trends that we are seeing? And one of the things that I like to, that maybe jumps out at me first is just what I would call just the sheer size of the market or the sheer growth of the technology landscape across pretty much all segments. So this slide here is showing just the marketing tech tool landscape, if you will, through about 2020. Today there's about, or in 2020, there were 8,000 solutions in that particular market. In 2017, there were 5,000. And in 2011, there were 150. So we know the market's bigger. We know the market's more crowded. We know that it's probably not only confusing for us to navigate in terms of who our competitors are and new entrants in the space, but also it's hard for our buyer to navigate as well. There's simply more things for them to consider. One of the other emerging trends that we've seen really does center around what we're seeing with the buyer. So a couple things that we've noticed. One is that buyers just seem to have dwindling attention spans or bandwidth for the traditional lengthy B2B sales cycle. And survey after survey that's gone out to buyers has been coming back with pretty much the same story. One is that buyers are looking for self-serve sales cycles more similar to what they experience in a B2C sales cycle when they're maybe going out and purchasing something on their own. This impacts, of course, our ability to get that all-important discovery meeting. It impacts our ability to build relationships. It impacts our ability to frame what they're learning about, because in many cases, they're learning about stuff before they ever talk to us. And then the other thing is that once we get to a point where, let's say that they like our product and they want to buy it, many of them are then going to be under pressure internally to justify why they want to buy the product. And so they're going to have to go and get consensus from other constituents, other adjacent business units, and that takes up a lot of their time as well. I'm certainly not the first SE to notice that we're increasingly successful when we focus on helping our buyers sell to their internal buyers versus just assuming that we only have to sell to the one buyer and then we're done. But maybe the most important trend that we've seen is what's sometimes called the buyer revolution, or just information parity. And this is really where the days where we held all the control, the A and the SE held all the information, those are dead. They're over. Buyers are going out, they're watching videos on YouTube, they're looking on subreddits, they're reading analyst reports, they're browsing blogs, forums, Twitter. And the result is that our hypothetical buyer is now more informed than ever before. And this is interesting. So the percentage of buyers who say they complete their buying journey, quote unquote, before they ever have contact with a sales team is 70%. So this means that by the time they pick up the phone and return our call or email, they're already pretty much through a huge chunk of the buying process. And at that point, we may just be there to confirm or deny their assumptions. So when we think of a sales cycle, as SEs, we have this concept that's kind of informed by the account team. So we prospect, we qualify the lead, we grow the lead. And for a long time, this was kind of how buyers in a B2B space understood the buying process as well. Account teams control the information. And so in a sense, we could control the sales cycle. But the reality, and this is something that we all know, is that this is actually a much smaller or vanishingly smaller part of the sales cycle, because what's actually happening looks a little bit more like this. So this is where the buyer's going out, they're signing up for freemium accounts, they're checking subreddits, they're basically doing all this analysis away from us. And this is not bad. Informed buyers are good buyers, but this does have the effect that when buyers are showing up to the table now, they're coming informed with increasingly more information. And so when they do engage with us, they're typically looking for different types of interaction models that maybe simulate what they're more used to in their day-to-day life. So unfairly or not, we are being compared to a B2B buying cycle. I see this change even within myself. If I'm looking, like, if I want to go out and buy a car or piece of software, I'm looking on tools like YouTube before I'm ever looking on the actual manufacturer's site. Buyers want to poke around. They want to do things on their own. They don't necessarily want to open up the doors to an aggressive sales campaign. And your buyer, while they're looking at this stuff, is probably sitting on their couch. Maybe they're doom scrolling Twitter or something like that. And so we need to be cognizant that as we're sharing information with the buyer, that it needs to be something that is suitable for these formats. And one of the other things that we're noticing is that buyers are increasingly looking for authentic, or let's say like non-fluffy or non-marketing slides, particularly for technical buyers. And the other thing to note is that, as I had mentioned earlier, it's not just one buyer, right? It's a whole bunch of people. It could be one team, it could be multiple teams, but essentially we find ourselves now having to sell and resell and help our buyers sell and resell within these accounts. So you can look at all this stuff and you can say that this is something of an existential crisis. We've got more competitors. Our buyers are more confused. They're more stressed. They've got more things to think about. We don't know what's going on in a good 70% chunk of the sales cycle. It's fair to say that in some ways, selling has never been harder. And if we want to bridge these gaps, we will need to just realize this, inhabit this, live with this, and find a way to adapt. And here's the hoary cliche. There is an opportunity here to get this right. There is a silver lining. Those SCs and sales orgs that can pull this off will have a huge advantage over those that have not figured this out, how to go ahead and pull this off. And here's where I want to stop talking, and I want to introduce Vanessa Martin to talk about some of the techniques that we're developing at Slack and building to try to get us closer to that future, whatever it may be. Vanessa, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. A quick mic check. Can everyone hear me? Yep. Okay. All right. So let's see here. Advance the slide. So thanks, Matt. When I first started in pre-sales about a decade ago, I spent most of my time giving product demos or helping customers through complex technical trials. That's me in the mismatching sweater right there on the left. A few years later at Salesforce, I focused on discovery and building relationships in order to map solutions to specific customer initiatives, traditional solution selling, if you will. But segue to now, and as Matt mentioned, by the time my team connects with prospective customers, they're 70% of the way there. They've already seen the demo, they've found answers to their questions online, but do they really know enough to craft the most elegant solution? So as SMEs, our teams often come up with approaches that customers hadn't really thought to consider. So we have a little paradox. Customers expect more personalized experiences, but yet they're less likely to commit to discovery. One customer recently summed it up nicely for me when they said, yeah, well, why should I help you sell your own product? So, in this environment, how do you earn trust? How do you provide the best possible outcomes? And one of the approaches that we take is really leading with the value hypothesis. So even when we miss the mark, our customers appreciate the effort that went into understanding, their business and their specific challenges. Ultimately, this leads to deeper engagement, conversation that benefits both parties. So whether you're pitching widgets or 3-year software agreements, selling business outcomes is the present and it's also the future. SEs today need to understand the customer, their industry, the sentiment of their employees, the new executive who wants to be the change agent. Only then are our customers' priorities going to come into focus. So how does that labor-intensive process scale? Let's see. We actually developed a playbook. So the first kind of primary thing we're going to cover is solution overviews. And these are what solution overviews look like at Slack. When we first started selling into the enterprise space, we realized that we had this horizontal product. It was challenging to figure out all the possible use cases. And also, they didn't always have calculable ROI. The solution overview was born from that challenge. The SE team maintains a deck of these. There's about 100 of these solution overviews. And they have the most broadly applicable value propositions for Slack, organized by line of business and available to everybody on the sales team. So, the slides are pretty simple. If you look at these, it's kind of like, what is the business outcome that the customer is looking to drive and how do we help? These slides have product screenshots. Sometimes they have animated GIFs. And the idea is that you sort of start on the left with a more generic hypothesis. And as you get to know the customer better, you move to the right where those are more customized. So, even when your sale is more straightforward than our sale, this simplified approach to solution selling is one that is going to help you scale. So we use these slides in a couple different ways and at different parts of the sales cycle. First, what we do is float these ideas to our prospects and champions in conversation. And for larger customers or strategic deals, they essentially become a personalized proposal. Sometimes we don't even demo. These slides stand on their own. They're great for executives or champions or as leave-behinds in a world where we're less likely to be able to demo these days. And finally, they're great learning tools for your team. So, we've grown exponentially year over year, and these are almost like flashcards as you come aboard, whether you're an SE or a salesperson. They help our teams internalize the value for Slack. And now that we're part of Salesforce, they're going to come in pretty handy there too. So step 2 in our playbook is creating connections that last. And in the before times, we had the luxury of business dinners and frequent travel. Back then, being on a text messaging basis with your customer was the ultimate litmus test. But so much has changed. And while travel will eventually pick back up, it's not going to be like it was before. And text messages are great, but they don't help us become multi-threaded with customers. So in a world where our deals are becoming more complex and they often involve multiple buyers, what we need are ways to broaden and deepen our connections. Methods that preferably don't involve 8 consecutive hours of Zoom or on a webcam. At Slack, one of the ways we solve for this is surprise by using our own product. Since we launched Slack Connect last summer, tens of thousands of our customers are using this feature to create bridges between their organizations. Think of it as being on a text messaging basis, only between 2 or more companies. And as SEs, we found Slack Connect instrumental in accelerating our sales cycles. Now, earlier, Matt had talked about decreasing attention spans. And we found that Slack helps with that too. So rather than dropping a bunch of sales assets on an unsuspecting prospect all at once, we use Slack Connect to create bite-sized messages. We drip information into the channel slowly, so it can be more easily digested and ruminated on and thought about before just sort of dropping a bunch of assets on people. And what's more, the information is preserved as part of the B2B relationship and the history and the context. So, years from now, when this gentleman, Jack, who works on my team, is in a different role and the customer's in a different role, people can scroll back to this history and understand how business decisions were being made at that time. So ultimately, what Slack Connect does for us is help us, preserve the relationship and the history. It creates a customer experience that is more B2C and, ultimately more personalized and frictionless. And what we also find is that, even within CS, it's helping drive our customer relationships and our loyalty throughout the sales process. Let's see here. So third in our playbook is advanced visualizations. And I'm sure everyone here appreciates the power of a well-timed and expertly crafted demo. In March of 2020, as I sat in my new garage office for our first ever virtual EBC, it was clear that our decision maker, camped out on his kid's bunk bed, had no appetite for the comprehensive demo that we had planned for that day. And in response to decreased opportunities for live demos and the realization that video was a medium that could help us scale our efforts, we asked our team to come up with short form demos, just in video snippets, essentially, focused on specific topics and lines of business. So next, what we did was adopted Consensus. And Consensus helps us bring those videos together in a choose your own adventure format. And at this stage, what we have are, I think we probably have about like 30 to 40 of these little mini demos where customers can essentially decide, what videos they're most interested in and when they want to watch them and consume them, which is often, we found, not in business hours. And of course, sharing those things internally and becoming our champions. So during our initial rollout, we realized that some of our team were natural with video. Others were a little bit more reticent, and that's okay. Video skills I think they're going to be increasingly more important, but not everybody has to be an expert today for this to work. What our team does is they will record 20-second intro videos to their customers and then queue up the curated content that's already there. So as they do that, ultimately we have more and more of these videos in our library. So nobody needs to be a video expert, maybe a few people, but not everybody. And we've also looked at some other tools. So, with the Salesforce acquisition of Slack, when that completed, we realized that we were dramatically outnumbered by their teams. I think I did the math. I think it's like 37-1 as far as SEs. So in order to spread the word about Slack, we really needed to get creative to be able to reach all of those prospective customers at Salesforce. And while video is one of the pillars of our strategy, we're also looking into tools that help us expand our team's footprint. Emerging technologies like Walnut and Demo Stack are tools that help us, really scale and personalize their demos. In essence, you're screen grabbing your product, editing it as if it were a template, and then creating a more personalized approach to demos. So we think that's an important part of scale for us. And for SE organizations looking to do more with less. We're also using tools that are more typically for product design teams, things like Figma and Envision. And with those types of tools, we're certifying salespeople to do lightweight demos on the rails with those tools. So by now, I think you probably picked up that we're really focused on scale, and tools that will help us reach our prospective customers in this new world are a really big part of our playbook. But how do you plan for and justify that scale? Here's our director, Lawryk, to share his process with us.
All right. Thank you, Vanessa. And thanks, everybody, for joining today. I think as you think about and listen to some of these strategies that we've employed at Slack, what's also important to consider is how this applies to your organization. I've been fortunate enough to work at SE organizations or work for SE organizations of all shapes and sizes. I've been the only SE. I've been a part of SE organizations with hundreds of SEs. And what I'm going to walk you through in the next couple of seconds here is a exercise that you can walk through, regardless of shape of size, to take stock of where SEs are spending their time, which I think is really critical, and look for areas for opportunity as it relates to scale and helping to utilize some of the strategies that Vanessa and Matt just mentioned. The first step, I think, is to take a step back, and this may seem simple, but to truly think about how you'll get more value out of your SEs if you introduce scale. And I know this is simple. I know all of us are seasoned leaders here, but I think sometimes it's important to simplify before you engage in sophisticated strategy or look to spend money on a tool or hire additional resources. It's just to think, okay, what could I actually gain from giving my SEs more time back? What would the impact be? So I think it's important to kind of root it in a why you're doing it in the first place before you start to explore opportunities for scale. And something that we did at Optimizely that I felt was really beneficial is just to align with our sales leaders as well, to say, hey, if we were able to give our SEs more time, we're thinking that the SEs can be attached to more revenue, they can work on more deals, and they can do so with less effort, so they can be more efficient. And we'll track that by tracking against win rate, attach rate, and how much time we're spending on the deal. The simple exercise that you can walk through, though, is to take stock of where SEs are spending time in the sales cycle. And what I've found in a couple of different instances is the best way to do this is actually through a qualitative survey. Regardless of shape or size or how sophisticated your activity tracking is, or whether or not even using some of these automated tools that can pull activity right off of your calendar, it's really helpful to have the SEs sort of give you a perspective on where they're spending time on a subsection of opportunities. So at Optimizely, what we were able to do is we were able to define these categories. This is like 6, 7, 8 categories of SE activity. We wanted to have an understanding or develop an understanding of where the SEs were spending time for each of these categories. So then we could understand where there's opportunities for scale. And what we did is we actually sent out that qualitative survey, as I mentioned. We asked the folks on the team to manually track how much time they spent per activity for a subset of deals they worked for a quarter. So in this case, it was Q4 2015. It could be for a quarter, for a year. I recommend a small subset of opportunities because it makes things easier, and you'll be amazed how accurate or how much insight you develop on a small subset of data. But the data that we collected was, of course, opportunity you worked on. We defined the category of activity. So what activity are you working on? And how much time did you spend on that activity? Really simple, but really interesting to get that perspective direct from the SEs on the front lines. And what we found is we were able to deduce how much time on average SEs were spending per deal according to their survey input. We were also able to deduce where they were spending time, and where they were spending most of their time in the deal, in this case, was not in front of customers, what we would deem kind of back office, non-strategic activity, and on preparing and doing sort of technical prep for demos, which is not really where we wanted them spending their time. And so what we came up with is, we were able to define the set of categories of activities for the entire SE org, and we're able to split that off into a separate function, which we call demo engineering, which is not a new concept, but was fairly unique to the organization at the time. And the sort of back office resource, which is just one person at that time, was focused on doing the things that were not related to direct customer facing activity. And we freed up the SEs to spend a lot more time on account strategy, product pitching, trial management, and more value oriented activities, more meeting the customer where they are. And again, this is something that doesn't necessarily fit in a particular stage of growth. You can do it as you're developing a small organization. You can do it when you have hundreds of people. It's just a really healthy exercise to go through, and even healthy if you have sophisticated activity tracking, because you can juxtapose the survey results versus what is being recorded in your CRM. And it's really interesting to see what the SE's perspective is in terms of where they're spending their time. So really healthy and valuable activity, which can help you really understand where you have opportunities for scale, be that a tool or a dedicated function. So, the first step to building that plan for scale early and often is doing that sort of qualitative activity analysis, identifying activity categories, asking where folks are spending time for a subset of opportunities. And then you take the results of that survey and share that with your sales execs. I'm sure each of you has a really strong partnership with your sales counterparts. It's really important for them to get a perspective on where the SEs are spending time as well, because it's easy to ask for budget, or not easy. It's one thing to ask for budget, ask for resources, ask for investment in some of these new tools that are coming onto the market. It's another thing for the sales execs to understand why you're doing that. And it's really important, I think, to share the results of this data so you develop that partnership and you together can make a strategic decision on where you should invest over time. And then once you've done that, once you have that partnership developed, it's an opportunity for you to identify tools or dedicated resources. And as Matt and Vanessa has mentioned, this is everything from developing something like a solution overview program, which is something you can do in-house, to investing in something like DemoStack, Walnut, and a lot of the other tools that are available in the market here. There's a whole, there's an explosion of SE related technology, as you all know, or even just carving out a resource on your team that's going to be dedicated to this stuff as well to free up time so you can meet your customers where you are. So in summary, we wanted to give you a bit of a path forward to help to employ some of these strategies that Matt, Vanessa, and myself have discussed. And the title of this original session was Hire for Then. And I think it's really important because none of this happens without the people in your organization. And again, it doesn't matter if you have one SE or you have hundreds of SEs. I think it's really important to hire for competencies. And as you're thinking about your hiring process, make sure those competencies support the modern SE framework that we've laid out today. The second is, as you're doing an activity analysis across your organization, is find opportunities for scale. And again, it doesn't have to be a $100,000 investment in tools or technology, although that can certainly go a long way. It's, finding unique opportunities, new programs, new ways to take some of that back office work off the plate of your frontline SEs, and ways to scale that across the company. And I guarantee as you go through that survey, you'll find those opportunities. And you also want to, take stock of your process and adapt your enablement accordingly. And what that means is that it's not just about training on product expertise or training in depth of expertise for your particular product. It's about making sure that as you're training folks, you're also developing their solution skill set. You're developing skills to help utilize some of these modern technologies and information consumption mechanisms, and make sure your hiring process is adapted accordingly. And finally, this is a concept from a previous session as well, but I like the term product expertise is temporary, because oftentimes we think as SEs that our exclusive job is to understand our product. That's important. But what's also important is understanding our customers and understanding the value that you bring to them. And this modern SE framework will carry that into the future. And not to mention, your SEs will enjoy their job as well. So with that, I'm not sure if we have time for questions. We got about 3 minutes left.
We definitely have some time for questions. So Zach, Vanessa, and Matt, love the presentation. There's a lot of good conversation happening. I'm actually super impressed that you've got so many different pre-sales technologies in your organization. And I love Vanessa's point about understanding the ratios of Slack SEs, the Salesforce SEs, and that kind of justification that exists there. One question that came up earlier around the desire for purchasing of self-service, right? There's a question around, and this is something that I brought up in the opening, right? Like, does it vary by market, by opportunity? Are we seeing, different verticals want more self-service than others? Zach, I'm curious if you have a perspective here.
Yeah, Matt and Vanessa, I'm sure will have a point here as well. But I think what's important there is that we sometimes get immersed in our own worlds and think it's really different. But the truth is you think about it from the consumer's perspective. Mm-hmm. They're on Netflix, they're on TikTok, they're on, I'm not on TikTok, but they probably are. They have a lot of different mechanisms that they're using to learn about things, to consume information. You have to meet them where they are, regardless of your industry or vertical. It's about how they're consuming information. And what we've found actually is if you employ new methods, you give them more information, they're willing to consume it on their terms. So it's about you kind of getting ahead of that. And I don't think it's unique to a market or vertical.
Yeah, I like that. Vanessa or Matt, you have something to add?
Yeah, I would add, there's certain technologies that you can't necessarily whip out a credit card and sign up for like a full-blown HR system. But even then, we are seeing an interest in getting some time with the product on your own terms, not necessarily brokered by an SE or an account team kind of breathing down your neck. Mm-hmm. Because I think that gives people a chance to figure out what they don't know and what questions they do want to eventually ask when they do get to the account team. So it's not appropriate for all segments and for all products, but I think that impulse to just understand yourself, whether it's you or through like a team, is something that we're all used to in our own personal lives. And so it's kind of only natural that that begins to creep into the enterprise space as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt. Vanessa, want to take us home here? Any opinions?
Yeah, well, I think the tool itself can be used in different ways, right? So if you're imagining like a more transactional business, just having some of those basic value propositions for your product that can be reused over and over again. And then at maybe the more strategic accounts and opportunities, like having that be fully customized and meant to, infiltrate and spread around a company. We've actually done both. So the same tool, I think, really allows you to have multiple strategies depending on what you're going for and where you are in the sales cycle as well.
Yeah, I really like that perspective. And there was a question from Joel in Slack. If the customers are already 70%, down the buying process, how are you supporting them? And I think it's tools like Consensus, right? The video automation, the absorb on your own time, demo stack, these tools that can be utilized, like you said, after work hours on your own to help with that process. So Zach, Matt, Vanessa, thank you three so much. Love the conversation, right? SEO of the future. It is so interesting to hear and see. And I love the fact that you guys are almost justifying your existence into the Slack acquisition. So rooting for you, excited, and love the work you guys are doing. So thanks for your time today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.